Welcome, Simon Jacobson here, broadcasting to you online only due to my travels this week to Argentina, Buenos Aires, and several other cities for a lecture tour. This evening is a special day in the calendar. It's the 19th of Kislev, tonight and tomorrow, and going into the 20th of the Hebrew month, the third Hebrew month, the Hebrew third month of Kislev. On this day, 219 years ago, the beginning of the 220th year, in the year Tov Kuf Nun Tes, that's the equivalent of the Hebrew, which is 5,559, and in the English year, that would have been 1798, because it's still before the new year. And on this day, the Shneir Zalman of Liadi, Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, the founder of Hasidus Chabad, the author of the Tanya, the great Talmudist, codifier of Jewish law, as well as great mystic and Hasidic master, was released from prison. And it's a significant day that's called the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus. The Rosh Hashanah of Hasidus, like a Rosh Hashanah, is a new year. The new year of, think of it, of spiritual thinking. The new year of spiritual thought, of spiritual direction, the soulful dimension to life, the soulful dimension to what is called Torah. There's an outer dimension, the body, and there's the inner dimension. And thus is the Rosh Hashanah. And we'll be discussing what that is in a few moments. And therefore the title of this discussion is called Two Souls, which is one of the key contributions and a very powerful way to convey the relevance and the significance of this special day, the two souls that Rabbi Shneir Zalman posited in helping us understand our own psyches, our challenges in life, and all the issues we deal with literally on a daily basis. Everything can be summed up in this context of two souls. But a little background, a little historical background, and the reason I'm actually going to Argentina is precisely because of this day. So I was asked to come there to give a series of lectures throughout the weekend, starting from Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, through the Sabbath, and Sunday returning next week, all about this theme, but most importantly, how to address the challenges and issues of our times. Because at the end of the day, all ideas and all abstract ideas can remain in very theoretical state if you don't concretize them into a personal blueprint for life, which, as you may know, is essentially the exact mission of the Meaningful Life Center and myself in all the teachings, is to take these lofty and esoteric and profound mystical and Kabbalistic ideas and offer them into simple blueprint for life. It's never simple, but in language that's palatable and relevant and personable in our emotional, psychological, and spiritual lives that can empower us to deal with growing, improving, accessing, and actualizing our greatest potential, as well as dealing with the difficulties in life, because everything does break down to actualizing and bringing forth the positive within us, and so to speak, weeding out the negative, like a garden. You need to nurture, water, seed, cultivate the garden in order for it to grow, but you also need to weed it to make sure that you don't have the negative influences. And in life, we also have these two forces, these two, you can say, two methodologies, and you want a real balance. You don't want to just be focusing on fighting demons, and you don't want to just be focusing on only doing the positive. You need to have a balance. Obviously, the focus always is on bringing light. But sometimes we do need to deal with a vice, a challenge, a fear, an inhibition, and all of that. So really, that's all what it's about, is taking these teachings and applying that. And even what I've just said is somewhat of a manifestation of the two souls that I referred to. So I'm going this lecture tour, and at the same time, we always want to keep this Wednesday night tradition that's going back over 30, now from 1981, what would that be, 91, 2001, 2011 is 30, over almost 36 years, 37 years, continuing the weekly tradition of this class. And if you're here for the first time, please take advantage of all our archives at meaningfullife.com and all our different offerings, both in writing, text, audio, video, tools, basically indispensable life tools, and what we call a spiritual health center, meaning just like you need to have a gym that helps you work out, or an exercise or a regimen and disciplines that help you develop and create a healthy body, the same thing, the soul and the psyche also requires such exercises, which is essentially what we offer these type of life skills that can address any one of our challenges, any one of our areas of life that we'd like to both grow in and also weed out the negatives. So with that, let us talk about the two souls, which is a central theme of Rab Shneir Zalman, who we are honoring this evening, as I said, the beginning of the 220th year of his release from prison. Now, traditionally, this is the way the Chabad Hasidic approach to his being imprisoned, even though there were ostensible reasons for it, but it was always seen as a challenge a challenge in heaven, a challenge to whether his approach is the correct one to be. It's not whether it's a correct one, whether it was correct to be disseminating it in that fashion. And his release from prison was a vindication, essentially an endorsement from heaven and from earth that yes, this is the right approach. And frankly, I wouldn't be here today teaching what I teach and giving these classes if it were not for this event that happened 219 years ago today. And it was the birth and the Rosh Hashanah of Hasidic thought, which offers us a contemporary, mystically based blueprint for life. Now, why I say mystically based? Because it's based on profound Talmudic and Torah in general thought and Talmudic and Kabbalistic and mystical teachings. But what he offered, what Rabbi Shneir Zalman was unique, what was novel about him, was that he was capable, he turned it all, he took thousands of pages that would, until that point, remain mostly cryptic and inaccessible, and turned it into a comprehensive blueprint. And many of the things I teach, I would say all the things I teach, are in some way based on this approach. But it's interesting, it wasn't about him, it wasn't something novel in a sense, it was based on everything before him, which was what made him so special. He was able to channel those teachings and turn them into this type of blueprint, which we can today in the 21st century use for our lives. Now, there's many aspects to this philosophy. I would call it philosophy/psychology, because it's not just a philosophy of life, and not just a map of the cosmos, but it's also a psychology of life. Because part of the cosmos, as Rab Shneir Zalman writes in his classic work, the Tanya, which is what I'll be referring to, the Tanya, which is today available, of course, the original Hebrew, but also in translation and different explanations. I definitely encourage, especially on a day like this, to look into that book. So in his Tanya, where he lays out this blueprint, so he, as I said, there are many themes and ideas, but one of the key themes is the two souls. And you see from his outline of his book, which consists of 5 sections, and we're focusing on the first section, which has 53 chapters, is essentially, which is, by the way, the same amount of days that he sat in prison, was 53, which corresponds also to the chapters in the Torah, in the written Torah, the 5 books, 53, that what he lays out there is not just a philosophy, but it's a psychology. It's a blueprint, it's an approach, it's a guide to living. Now, if you read it, you'll see it's quite dense and quite complicated. You'd say it's just as cryptic as maybe it's the sources where he cites from. It's not the case, because the fact is he turned it into something that is workable, and as we will discussing. So the theme that I'm going to address, and there are other themes that have been addressed, and if you email our office at meaningfullife.com at our website, we'll be happy to send you a selection of different articles. And one of the articles, I called it the true father of psychology. Many people call Freud the father of psychology. But Freud was 100 years ago, and he was over 200 years ago. And when you study his teachings, you realize that he is the true father of modern psychology. And I discussed some of his contributions in that article, and several of them. What I'm going to talk about here, as I said, is the theme of the two souls. One of the big dilemmas that every one of us faces, everyone, no one's immune, 7 billion people on this planet, everyone faces a challenge of the different voices that we have within us, tugging us in different directions. Some of us have many voices, but we can categorize them into two categories, which is the essential theme of the Tanya. And that is one voice we'll call the voice of survival. There's a voice to survive. We need to survive. We need to pay our bills. We need to live, pay our bills in order to survive, which means have shelter, have clothing, have food and drink, sleep, bear our children and protect them, and all the things that we call in the category of survival, which is what we are preoccupied most of the day. Then there's another voice, we'll call it the voice of transcendence. Transcendence is the fact that human beings are not satisfied with the quotidian, with the tediousness and regimen of routines and patterns of survival. We're just not satisfied. Animals live on that level, and that's their clockwork. But a human being has a restless spirit, and a restless spirit that searches and seeks to improve life. Oh, you have one type of home, you want a better home. You have $100, you want to have $200. We are constantly striving to grow, and that creates a restlessness and even an angst in our spirit. Now, in the Cartesian thought, it's sometimes seen as I think, therefore I am, that there's two parts. There's the body and there's the soul. In today's more modern world, some people argue that's a duality, and they look at everything as being part of the body. It's just two different forms of the machine. And they consider that a unified element. Rav Shneur Zalman introduces a third approach, which we'll be discussing, which counters many of the attitudes we have, but most importantly, when you understand it, you see it as being, I would make the case, as the best of all schools of thought models, psychological models possible. So the first thing we address is the fact that we do have these voices, these two voices and these two different directions that tug at us. And all neuroses and all fears and all insecurities are built on the fact that we have these two voices. Animals don't have neuroses unless they're overexposed to human beings. They don't have duality. They don't have the duplicity. They function just like the sun rises in the morning. The sun has no neurosis, neither does the moon, neither do the oceans, and neither do the winds and the mineral, vegetable, and animal world. I always mention this as somewhat humorous, but it's also true. I remember being a New York boy going up once to the mountains, and I saw a cow. You don't see cows in New York. I'm talking about an animal cow, not human cows. I don't know if that was a good joke or not, in good taste, but no name, so therefore it doesn't make a difference. And I saw a cow, and I saw it grazing in the field, and I was studying it. It was so interesting to me. It is satisfied, content with grazing in the meadow. And it takes care of its young, and it feeds, and it sleeps, and protects, and does everything it has to do. It's not aspiring, it's not jealous of a fellow cow, it's not aspiring to build a bigger business, doesn't have any technologies to concern it, does not busy responding to texts, it's not responding in any way in any to dysfunctional parents, doesn't have neurosis, therapy-free, neurosis-free. And sometimes it could even be an envious position, what we call animal bliss. But frankly, is there a human being that would be satisfied with that? Yeah, sometimes we'd love to have that. But human beings, you see, even when we dream about vacation and we go on vacation, we by nature, we are not capable of just sitting around. Now, I know many people will say, one second, a lot of people have learned to sit around, but become couch potatoes. We've learned to do nothing. Who says that's healthy? The human spirit is always aspiring. That's why animals have not tried to improve their habitats. They live in the same habitats they lived 1,000 years ago. They don't have better cell phones. They don't have cell phones altogether. They don't have technologies to improve. As I discussed a number of times, an animal, one of the expressions of the Hasidic masters, a successor of Rav Shneur Zalman, that behemoth, the animal never saw heaven. An animal walks on all fours. Its physiology fits its psychology and fits its emotional makeup, which is it looks down because that's what it needs to do. It needs to feed. It needs to look to the world around it. It is basically functioning, and that's what it has to do. And it serves an important role in doing so. The human being walks upright, which makes our eyes look up. Raise your eyes to heaven, and you see who created this all. We start wondering, what's out there? We spent billions, if not trillions of dollars on a NASA program to understand one thing, to satisfy one thing, our curiosity. What's out there? That's the human spirit. And there's these two voices, because we also have the animal side to us. We also need to breed, and we also need to eat, and we need to protect, and so on. And many, many times, even what I would call the transcendent voice spills over into the survival one, where making money is for us sometimes a transcendent experience. But the human being is not satisfied. In the story I often tell in Toward a Meaningful Life, I use the story right in the beginning. The first chapter is called Body and Soul, the two voices. And I talk about the two worlds, that by the analogy, the story of the Tzemach Tzedek, the grandson of Rav Shneur Zalman. He was a little child playing with other children, and they're climbing on a ladder. All the other children were afraid to climb to the top. He climbed to the top. And later his grandfather said to him, to the little boy, he said to him, why were you the only one that had the courage to climb to the top of the ladder? He said, is that very simple, Zayd? Zayd is grandpa in Yiddish. The other children, when they were climbing, they kept looking down. So they saw how high they were afraid to climb higher. I was climbing, I kept looking up. I saw how low I was. It motivated me to climb higher. So when you're around people that have accomplished less than you, you look down, you often feel satisfied, content. But when you're around people that and don't feel motivated to grow, when you're around people that have accomplished more than you, you look up, you see what you're able to do and you haven't done yet, that creates a certain healthy frustration, a healthy angst, a healthy competition. Competitive juices begin to flow and makes you climb higher. So these two voices exist. Sometimes the analogy for it, a good analogy, is a flame and a wick. The wick grounds the flame. The flame is always defying gravity, flickering upward. That's the closest approximation to our soul. So we have these two voices within us. And Rabbi Shneur Zalman documents and calls them two souls. What he calls the Nefesh Habam is the animal soul. That's the survivor within us. It is an impulsive, instinctive type of creature or voice, soul, whose main focus is exactly that. What the impulses tell us is my needs. What do I need? Me, me, me. And then we have the divine soul. What he calls the Nefesh Elokim is the divine soul. And like a flame, the divine soul is not about me. The divine soul resides in the mind, as opposed to the animal soul in the heart. And the reflective mind, in contrast to the impulsive heart. What does the reflective mind do? It reflects. Not everything I want is good for me. It's not based on pure emotional tugging. It's emotional seduction and emotional temptations. It focuses and reflects, is this good for me? And these two voices, these two souls clash with each other. And that's the major part of the Tanya, is the clash, the battle, a true battle. So nothing to be afraid of, that Rabbi Shneur Zalman writes in Tanya. We all have this battle. So when someone says, I feel like two different people, who am I? Am I the man of my work and my job and career? The person that people look at me, the battler in life, the warrior, having to deal with all the challenges life has? Or am I this transcendent, noble, and more and refined spirit? And the answer is you're both. You have two voices, you have two souls within you. And two equal souls. Each soul has a full series of faculties, intellectual ones and emotional ones, all being used by each soul toward its interests. The animal soul uses the mind and the heart to satisfy its needs for survival. The divine soul uses the mind and the heart in order to reach for transcendent and noble and more selfless activities. But because they reside together as one, they both compete. As the Rabbi Shneur Zalman gives the beautiful analogy based on the verse, Ir Ktana, Ir Ktana, that we are all a small city, and the Talmud says the small city is within us, and there's a battle between two monarchs, two kings, these two souls. Who's going to control the city? But the control of the city is not just which faculties will dominate. As he explains, the faculties manifest in three forms of expression: thought, speech, and action. So your mind can be focused on survival needs. Your soul can be that's the animal soul, focused on your survival needs. The divine soul is focused on transcendent and spiritual and more sacred and more selfless experiences. But those are the faculties. That's the way they function. Well, the battle is over who's in control. Not question that we have these two. We're not trying to vanquish one or the other. We're trying to determine who is going to control your life. And control is not about the actual soul, it's whether the soul dominates in our thought, speech, and action. Because thought, speech, and action are called garments. Those are the only way we can express ourselves. You can think either survival thoughts, or you can think of transcendental thoughts. So both voices, both souls communicate to you, and they battle. They both are competing for the same thought, speech, and action. And it's incumbent upon us, and this is the power that each of us has naturally, as Rabbi Shneur Zalman explains. Naturally, that's a key word, as you'll see in a moment. Naturally, that we have both voices, and you can have the capacity to determine which one will rule, which one will govern your thought, speech, and action. So even if your thoughts are, for example, is involved in something that is selfless, you're helping somebody else, that doesn't mean that you don't have a temptation for other things. That's the key thing, is to know that we have it. We're not looking to destroy it. It's not even capable of being destroyed, because we were created that way. That's how we're born. But you control yourself. And you control yourself with that natural power to control and follow the voice of the selfless voice, the transcendent voice. is the way I will use the expression going forward, versus the survival one. Now, it could be the other way around too, God forbid. You can focus your thought and your speech and actions can be controlled by the other monarch, by the other leader, the other governor governing, and that is for survival purposes. That doesn't mean that the divine voice, the divine soul disappears. It just means it's undercover. It's not being expressed. So think of it like potential talents, potential strengths, with two souls both competing for the resources of expression in your life. Which one will be actualized in your thoughts, which is thoughts to yourself? Because there's only three ways to express yourself. Thought to yourself, speech to another, and action to everybody. Action is a tangible, concrete creation based on what you're involved in. Who is going to dominate? This is a central theme in the Tanya, and if you think about it, it really provides us with a blueprint. It offers us an approach, a modality to which we can address every issue that that affects us. But I want to talk a bit more about the control part, because that's a critical component. Because you can make the argument, as Freud does, and as other variations of schools of thought, that you know what, we are essentially what I call the Darwinian Freudian model, social Darwinism, and that is what? That we are essentially animals. We are that animal in the field. However, we've evolved. Our intelligence evolved, so instead of sitting and munching on grass, we have developed much more sophisticated survival, and it has an element of growth in it as well. But we're fundamentally, and this is the machinist, I don't know how to pronounce it, the machinist view, which is not duality of the Cartesian thinking of Descartes and others who are more religious, think that there's a divine soul and there's a body, but rather that we are machines, but we've evolved into sophisticated machines. And this machine is primarily survival. The selfish gene in Richard Dawkins' classic book. It was selfish gene, that's all there is. The selfishness sometimes manifests in nobility and in giving because it's part of survival. So we do whatever it takes to survive. But it's fundamentally a selfish reality. With that being said, any act of selflessness, unless there's a selfish gain in it, it doesn't really exist. And even if we educate ourselves and we train ourselves and we train our children to be giving, it's superimposed at best, because at the heart of it all, we are fundamentally, inherently animals. An animal means, not necessarily animal means bad, but animal means self-oriented, self-contained. And you can make the argument that any education, any etiquette, is, in Freud's words, ego or superego, imposed upon due to social mores, due to coexistence, other reasons. We impose, instead of just giving in to that, to the pleasure principle that lies at the heart of the id, and our selfish and inner, including sexual drives, we have a so-called monitor, we have a policeman, so to speak. Red lights, green lights, because we understand there's a need to not allow everybody just to follow their selfish needs, or else we can destroy each other. But there's really no competition. One is natural, one is inherent, innate, and the other one is acquired. Comes Vishnaya Zalman in chapter 12 of Tanya, says no. There is a battle between these two voices, between these two souls, but self-control, he writes, is inherent. It's natural. Self-control is not just something that's superimposed due to education. Now, what's his case for that? You can make a very strong case. Look at young children. Can young children be expected to not cry when it's hungry or in pain or uncomfortable? Just like an animal, impulsive. So why are we arguing that there's an element of self-control, of reflective, that is as powerful as the impulsive survival voice or the survival soul? And we know very clearly that anything that's inherent is ultimately always more powerful than something that's acquired. And if you look at the trajectory of our lives, maturing, we mature from just being completely impulsive, and then we learn as we develop, hey, you don't just grab anything, you share, you say please, you say thank you, you don't steal, we have rules. But the rules are all superimposed or acquired as opposed to the natural instinct, which is why naturally, left without any checks or balances, left without any law enforcement, left without any type of accountability, we'll just gravitate back to that selfish creature. And the case can be made even stronger. Look, you see the stories, God forbid, in times of famine or in times of a avalanche, where people are stranded without food. And even normal, healthy people can turn to cannibalism to take advantage of the weaker ones, and actually do things that are horrendous. No one should ever be tested, but in those circumstances, extreme circumstances, resort to behavior that we would call animalistic, complete barbaric. So when it comes to animals, actually, that's part of the natural balance, that you have predators and you have prey, and it's important for the balance that be there. But when humans turn on each other, as I said, nobody should be tested. So a very strong case can be that we are the selfish gene, we are selfish creatures with rules that we've imposed and we have accepted upon ourselves. But push comes to shove, cut to the chase, cut to the core, we are selfish, the id. So how does Alter Rebbe make a case otherwise? So two things. Firstly, he brings, well, I don't know if it's firstly or secondly, one, he brings a verse, a proof, which I'll elaborate after I say the logic. The logic it is that basically with that approach, accountability and responsibility is essentially expected due to social mores, not due to anything inherent. You could make a case that a person murdered someone, stole from someone, simply because they naturally gravitated back to their natural being. The case against it would be that we need to have a system of law and order, and if we don't have deterrence, and we don't have punishment, and we don't have any consequences, there won't be accountability, and people will just gravitate to their selfish side. But the Alter Rebbe is coming from a Torah-based approach, where accountability and responsibility is an obligation. It's a mitzvah. It's the way we were created to behave a certain way. You can't expect something from someone that's not capable. How could you expect true self-control when we are essentially animals? So based on that, he makes the case that it has to be natural. There's going to be accountability, and there's going to be expectations that are real, that God expects of us. The Creator knows that we have a selfish side. He had created us that way. So you have to say that we also have another side that is noble, and there's a real fighting chance, because then self-control is in our power. It's not acquired, it's innate. And he quotes, Me'ich Shalt Alev, the mind can control the heart naturally. So what about the children? You see young children don't have that? Well, a lot of things. Young children have great talent, have great minds. You also don't see it when they're young. You need the years of maturity and plus education to reveal, not to create. It's not acquiring a skill, it's revealing the natural self-control that we already have in our psyches. The proof from the verse, he brings from Ecclesiastes, where it says, King Solomon says, and I've seen, I see. The advantage of wisdom over folly is like Kiyusun, is like the advantage of light over darkness. So based on this, this is what the case he makes. When you look at light and darkness, and the comparison is the key. What do we see light and dark? Light and dark are not two adversaries, adversaries, I should say. I always mix the two up. Two adversaries that are equal. When it comes to fire and water, they're two true adversaries. Enough fire can evaporate a large body of water. Enough water can extinguish the greatest fire. Light and darkness, in the darkest room, you put a little light, automatically and naturally dispels the darkness. Not of the entire room, you'd need a bigger light. But in that area, there's no battle. It's not like a battle where the flames are flickering, the water is trying to put them out, and the flames are continuing to be there, and one is going to dominate over the other in a battle. Here, there's no battle. A little light dispels darkness. Since King Solomon compares that to Chochmah and Sichlus, which is wisdom and folly, and wisdom is the reflective mind where the divine soul resides, and folly is the heart, the impulsive heart, where the animal soul resides. Just like light has natural dominance over darkness, so too does the divine soul, the mind, have natural dominance over the heart. And you see this. Put two people in a room, one more intelligent than the other, one a very passionate, impulsive heart. Another person, a far more intelligent person, with barring the fact that the impulsive one may have a weapon or may have other a level playing field, the smarter one will always dominate over the fool, because he thinks ahead. The fool doesn't have a fighting chance. Again, I'm not talking about if you give the fool the weapon or the lever or the ability to create destruction. We're talking about everything being equal. The wiser person will always naturally be dominant over the fool, not even with an effort, because the fool doesn't understand what the wise person understands, can preempt, can be ahead of the game, and you see this all the time. So why do we see folly dominate over wisdom? Because the wisdom is not being allowed to express itself. So to put it bluntly, when you have a temptation, whatever it may be, and you allow your heart to, and you act on your heart's impulses, most likely the mind is not even being allowed to speak. But let us say for every time you had an impulse to do whatever it may be, let's talk about negative things, vices, feeding into the worst we can be, the selfishness, but you gave equal time to your mind to make a case. Why not to behave that way? You tell me, what do you think will happen? Most mistakes happen because we allow the impulse, which is exactly that, it's an impulse. And we act on it before we allow ourselves to reflect. Think of a telemarketer calling you on the phone, right? They call you on the phone, hey, we got something to sell you. And they're excellent. They know how to manipulate your emotions. And you say, let me think about it. They say, the deal is over. By the time we end this call, you have 30 seconds. You have a minute. You have 60 minutes. What's the point? They want you to make the decision without reflecting. If you would reflect and come back to them 12 hours later, most likely you're not going to buy most of the shmatas. Most of the shmata, how do you define shmata? Most of the worthless items that they're offering you because you reflected. The power of impulse is it seduces us before we can reflect. How many mistakes have we made in our lives that you know at the time that you may regret it later? But the power of the seduction, the power of the passion, in the throes of passion, it's extremely difficult, even if you know there are negative consequences. People talk about their sexual vices, how they suddenly get caught up in a seduction, they suddenly get so obsessed and consumed, they cannot stop themselves, even when they know, and someone says to them, there's consequences, something can really bad happen. But that moment you become brainless. As he says in Tanya, the blood of the heart rushes to the brain. And what happens? It takes over the brain. And the brain now becomes completely biased and prejudiced by the impulse of the heart, which tells you this is pleasure, even if it's instant gratification, even if you know it's destructive, even if you know it's only going to last a minute. That's the power of impulse. That doesn't mean you don't have a chance. It means that you have to understand that you have another voice, but you have to give it a platform. You have to allow it to speak to you. And when you do, then you have a real battle, and then the Tanya continues, then you can win, because God will always take the side of the sober, reflective mind, the divine soul over the animal soul. But there's one condition: you have to give it equal time. You know, it's to call the kangaroo courts or the communist courts. It was very interesting. They arrested somebody. There was a prosecutor, made a case against him. There was no defense. So he was automatically declared guilty. There was no other side. That's the equivalent when you give in to your passions and you just allow them to take over. So the impulse was always going to win. That's what impulses are. Comes a second voice and the natural innate ability to control. That wisdom can control the folly, can control the darkness, like light naturally dispels darkness. And that's where you have that the second voice, the voice of the divine voice, has its power to really dominate. So the challenge is, my friends, is how do we create that pause? How do we create that discipline to allow that voice to manifest? That comes as a lifetime of work. Well, I'm not going to say a lifetime because it's maybe too intimidating, but it is a lifetime of work. But it begins right now by feeding your soul, by feeding that reflective voice, by understanding what transcendence is, understanding the purpose of your life. That the survival part of you is the machine, is the body in which you occupy and the world in which you walk. But the soul, the transcendent soul, is the purpose of your life, to achieve transcendence. And that exactly is the purpose of existence, that our divine soul manifests inside of a body and an animal soul that has a very different agenda. And the divine soul has the wisdom and the ability and the reflection and the sophistication to train, educate, guide, and harness the animal soul to understand the importance and the value of cooperating with and being a vehicle for the divine and transcendent experiences in our lives. So to take a small example, you sit down to a meal, beautiful meal, you're very hungry. Your animal soul says, I'm hungry, let me start eating. And you start eating just freshing in a way that just to satisfy your own indulgent needs. The divine soul comes and says, 1 second, eating is a gift. God has blessed you with the food. The food, the strength that you're going to get from this eating should be used for good ends. So before we eat, let's first make sure that we're eating the proper thing. Number two, let's make a blessing on the food. Let's understand that we're redeeming the sparks, and that it's actually a sacred act to sit at a meal. The table is the altar. The meal is an offering. And the power of the meal, the energy that you get from it are also included, as he says in the Bible, that not on bread alone does man live, but on the spark, of the divine spark within that bread. They tell the story of one of the Rebbes, Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Chabad Rebbe. So he was once given a plate of soup with noodle soup. And he took a spoon and then he put the soup with the noodle, but the noodle slipped out, which happens so often. And he was heard whispering, he says, it's not ready yet. The noodle's not ready yet to be elevated, to become part of something of this Rebbe and his strength that he will gain, that he may make the world a better place. Not ready yet. Because it's an act of redeeming divine spark. Sometimes it's even considered a battle. A meal is considered a battle. Lechem, which means bread, also means locham, can mean war. And it could also mean cholam. When you reverse the letters, you reorganize the letters, it means to dream. To dream of what? Of a higher and better reality. So even when we have a meal, the blessing before the meal, the blessing after the meal, is all meant a battle, but you want the battle to be won by the divine and transcendent dimension. You're not just eating the food to survive. The food and the energy that comes out of the food thanks you, because you've turned it into a force for good. This is one example. Every minute of our day, every minute of our lives, we have these two choices. The two souls within you, battling for your attention, battling for your thoughts, your speech and action. Which one will it be? Will you choose to sleep a little extra to keep yourself comfortable? Or will you get up a little earlier to pray, to go volunteer, go visit someone that needs help? These are voices that are here. These are two choices that we have every moment. When we commute, when we go to work, will you choose self-containment, the self-oriented animal soul, or will you choose to follow the divine? And you have that choice because it's inherent within you to choose. But it's an effort, and it's a battle. As he says in Tanya, it will always be a battle. The battle does not get easier. But no, that's exactly why you were created for this battle. In heaven, we don't have such two voices. There is only one voice. The soul is basking in the spiritual glow and spiritual aura of the divine energy that's around it. No choice. Here we have the choice. Here we're thrust into a world, a hostile world, a world that's a very selfish world, a world that teaches us to be selfish. Sharks, dog eats dog. You want to survive, take care of yourself because no one's going to take care of you. Everybody's fighting for their own interest. And you come to realize, no, that's the world in which we were placed. That's not who we are. Who you are is not the id, but the yid. Put a Y right before the id. So Freud was right. He cut deep, but didn't cut deep enough. He found at the core, the id, the selfish id. But you cut a little deeper, you find the yid, the second soul, the divine soul. The yud, which is like a spark, it's a dot. It's a divine spark that goes beyond the animal soul, which is also part of who we are. So there is a id, but there's also a yid. And there's a battle, and you have the ability naturally, not by superimposed, not acquired, to be able to control and follow that voice. This is one of the central themes of Rabbi Shneur Zalman, what he contributed. Now you'll say, well, I've heard this in other places. Yeah, this no problem. That's exactly correct. But he turned it into a full comprehensive blueprint, a philosophy and psychology for life, and discusses at length in Tanya how can we continue to cultivate that divine and not listen to the other voice? How can we harness the other voice, the animal voice, and make it work side by side together with this voice? The how, of course, is the challenge. The what I've shared briefly, at least. There's a lot more to say, obviously, but I've given some of the key themes. So two souls seem to be the key to so many, not so many, I would say, to all real challenges in life, that they're the two souls, the two voices, the two different directions that we are headed. And the thing is, they are like a snowball. They can work. You can have one moment you could be noble, another moment you can be completely the opposite. Sometimes it gets so mixed together. Our goal in life is to balance, is to tip the scales toward the divine, toward the transcendent. Now, mind you, transcendence takes on many different shapes and form. First, like I said before, survival, we know what that is. That's paying your bills, making sure you exist, making sure you survive in this world. It could be even a prosperous survival, but it's survival. It's a person that's basically dealing with the earthly matters and essentially focused on the mundane. The transcendent is focused on the ethereal, on the sublime, on more spiritual pursuits. It could be, by the way, well, it's not by the way, it can be through music, art, travel, different hobbies. It could be through love and romance. And of course, through faith and religion and spirituality. They're all legitimate ways of experiencing transcendence. Obviously, there's transcendence and there's transcendence. But the transcendent life means that your focus is not on me and my needs and my survival. It's focused on what am I needed for. Not what you need, but what are you needed for. It's focused on the soul's search for something greater, on the flame reaching upward, on the climbing of the ladder, looking up instead of looking down. This does not mean we reject the material world. We're not talking about asceticism. We're not talking about abstinence. We're talking about harnessing and channeling. Sometimes it requires some abstinence. Sometimes it requires refraining from certain temptations. But the focus above all is to elevate that the animal soul is also part of the process. It's also part of the party. A few weeks ago I gave, not a few weeks ago, maybe I don't remember. I definitely gave a class talking about the famous analogy of the Baal Shem Tov, beautiful analogy in this regard, of a king that sent his son, his only heir to the throne, away from the kingdom because he grew up in a palace, all spoiled, all taken care of, never had to earn his way. The king wanted him to be a truly noble and a truly kind and generous and mature leader, not just a spoiled brat. So the king says, okay, I will send you away from my home, from my palace, as painful as it is, to live among your future subjects, to live in the land and without anyone taking care of you. Earn your way. And of course, the day comes when he sends him away, and the king says to his son, listen, I'm not happy to send you, but it's for your growth, and it's necessary. You will probably forget that I sent you, so I will send you a letter several times a year to remind you that you are my son, and I sent you for a mission, in order to you to earn your way, in order to understand the ways of the world, so you can then be a benevolent and kind and wise king. The son is sent away. It's sad that day, and yes, indeed, he gets used to his ways, assimilates in the city that he's living. Nobody knows who he is, and he himself begins to become one of the townspeople. That's who he becomes, and he does forget. But then, several times a year, he receives a letter from his father who says, "You're my dear son. I miss you so much, my beloved son." My beloved child, it can be a daughter too, just an analogy. And I want to remind you why you're there. You're not there just to be there. You're not just there to survive. You're there to learn, to become a greater person, to learn to lead, to understand the needs, and be sensitive to the mundane world in which you live. And when the son of the child receives the letter, he wants to celebrate. Yes, he remembers. He's reconnecting to his mission. Well, what's he going to do? Tell the town people, hey, I'm going to be your future king, and now I just received a letter. They may be resentful, they may not believe him, they may think he's crazy, they may even hurt him. He comes up with a great idea, the Baal Shem Tov says. Throws a party, free cocktails, drinks, food, the whole thing, a feast for everyone. The townspeople are delighted, a free meal of such quality, of such caliber. They're celebrating because they received a free meal. And meanwhile, he's celebrating because he received a letter from his father. Says the Baal Shem Tov, the Father is God. The soul is each one of us, each one of the 7 billion people on this earth. The soul. The soul is sent to this world, not just to cause us pain. It's a difficult life. It's a hostile world, hostile to spirituality. It's a selfish world. In order to refine this world, harness it, understand its ways, and turn it into a dira b'tachtenim, a home for the divine in this world. Yes, a spiritual home in this material world. A temple, a sanctuary. And we're made to forget. When we're born, the Talmud says, an angel comes and does shh. That's why we have a cleft right above our upper lip. Forget the entire Torah, which is the resources that are embedded and downloaded into the psyche. As the Alter Rebbe hints to in the beginning of Tanya Masbiyane, say that that the soul takes an oath, but it also means the soul is sated, is fed, is nurtured, and nourished with all the power it needs to deal with the challenges in this life. To be a righteous person and not a wicked person, a tzaddik and not a rasha. But then we're made to forget. Why are we made to forget? Why do you download all these resources in order to forget? Our conscious minds forget, but not our unconscious or supraconscious. So it's always there, like I said before. You naturally have self-control. You naturally have a divine transcendent side, but it can be dormant. So now comes the effort to awaken it. And when you do, it becomes powerful. So what does the soul do? When it reminds itself, a holiday, a Sabbath, a Shabbat, or other times, it knows the body and the animal soul are not interested in spiritual matters. So it says, you know what? Here's Shabbat, let's make a special meal for you. Here's Purim, here's Hanukkah coming up, Latkes, Purim, Hamantash, and Shavuos, Blintzes. Every holiday has its meals. Sleep a little extra, be a little more social, you'll have more time, you're not going to school, you're not going to work. All this is to get the body to feel participant, because there's no other way to get the body to understand the value of this transcendent moment. While the soul experiences transcendence. So you're not rejecting the body, you're not abstaining, you're feeding the body. But we know that what's really the story behind the meal, behind the drinks, behind all the celebration is really a transcendent experience. Then the king's son, and then each of us earns our way, because we learn from the ways of the world not to succumb to it, not to be seduced by that, but on the contrary, to use the food and drink and everything else that survival demands in order to become part of a transcendent experience. That the meal is done in a sacred way, like I said before, with the right blessings, the right prayers, the right focus. And our work is not just an end in itself, our careers. It's when people ask you, who are you? And you give them your business cards. No, that's what you do. What you do is a means to who you are, which is your soul's purpose in this world. As when God said to Adam, as the Alter Rebbe in prison was asked by one of the ministers, what does it mean when God says to Adam after the eating of the tree of knowledge, Ayeko, where are you? He didn't know where he was. God doesn't know where he is, hiding. And the Alter Rebbe gives first the conventional answer that Rashi gives, and the minister says, no, I want to hear your answer. The Alter Rebbe stood up purportedly and looked at him in his eyes and said, this is an eternal question that's asked to each one of us. God has given you this and this amount of years, and he gave a number, 61 years, I believe. 61 years old, where are you? What have you done with your life? Are you fulfilling the mission for which you were sent here? Sometimes you're sitting near someone, you see them, and still you say, where are you? Because they've spaced out. You know where they physically are. Where's their soul? Where's their interest? Where's their focus? Where's their priorities? Where are their values? And after the eating of the tree of knowledge, God saw the human being lost some of his image. The divine image remains intact, but it was clouded. It became covered up. And that's why we say that animals will never attack a human being, like you see Daniel in the lion's den. But then we see animals do attack a human being. Why won't they attack a human being? Because the human being is in the divine image, and the animal respects that. But when our divine image is defiled, and we look like a plain animal, then the animal is not afraid of another animal. It's afraid of the divine image, afraid in a positive way. It knows that it's standing in the presence of kingship. It's in presence of royalty. So God says, where are you? And that's the question that the Alter Rebbe said there in prison, and it's a question to each one of us. Where are you? You're living your life, you're making money, you're being successful, you're prosperous, you're healthy, you look good, you have a good family. You're surviving well, you're taking care of your needs well, and maybe even more than well, prosperously and in abundance. But where are you? Where's your soul? Are you fulfilling the purpose of it all? Because all that is a means, it's stepping stones to reaching a greater place. That's the story, my friends, of the two souls. Both are necessary, and both deal with, one deals with the world in which we live, and one deals with elevating that world to a greater place. That is, in a nutshell, the essence of our lives. You have both, but you have to make sure that the divine soul is the captain of the ship. The soul tells the body and the animal soul where to go, not the other way around. The wagon driver leads the wagon and the animal, the horse, or whoever is leading it, not the horse leads the wagon driver. So we have to understand and put that focus on what's a means and what's an end. So this in honor of the 19th of Kislev, which is tonight, tomorrow, and extends the next day, the 219th anniversary, beginning the 220th year of that great day, and we relive it. This is one of the ways to honor it, is by actually embracing this philosophy. Read more about it, learn more about it. It will transform your life. And please see the Meaningful Life Center as you could say an interface with our attempt to translate and apply and personalize these ideas in a language that provides us all with life skills that address all the challenges and all the issues in our lives, both expressing our divine soul, our great potential, and also weeding out and avoiding the pitfalls and the difficulties and the challenges that life presents us. Seeing each challenge as a springboard to further and greater growth. May each of us embrace this teaching, these teachings. Look around at meaningfullife.com. You'll find more about the two souls. So send us an email and we're happy to send you some resources. May everyone have a good Yontif. That's what we call Yotes Kislev, the Rosh Hashanah of Chassidus. And may this Rosh Hashanah extend through the entire year as a Rosh, as a head, is more than just a head and a beginning. It's also a central nervous system. To actually learn about our souls in ways we've never learned about before. Learn to discover what you are, what makes you tick. What are the forces that shape who you are? And then learn what forces should be in control and what forces should be the tools and instruments, and who should be the captain of the ship, which is obviously the divine directing the animal within us. God bless you all, and until next week, this has been Simon Jacobson talking about the two souls on this 19th of Kislev. Thank you very much.